For a more dependable, durable, and capable tractor, check out the lineup of high-horsepower Massey Ferguson equipment. The 7700 S Series tractor is loaded with features to increase your comfort and productivity. And if you run a dairy farm, the RB Series balers are built to handle everything your operation demands. Straightforward, dependable, Massey Ferguson equipment. Visit masseyferguson.com to find out more.
Welcome to Inside Farm Life, your weekly connection to agriculture newsmakers, hot-button industry issues, educational features, and the best in true country music. Now, here's your host, Brent Adams.
Well, welcome to another episode of Inside Farm Life. We thank you for giving us some of your time this week. On this episode, Pioneer agronomist Rex Brandon is along to talk about spontaneously forming lesions on corn plants and what you should be on the lookout for. We talk with United We Ag podcast host Derek Brosda about his upcoming season. Jesse Allen is along with another market talk update, and the hot rod farmer Ray Bohacks wonders if you could use an extra set of eyes while operating your farm equipment. Then we take things back to the country with singer-songwriter Daryl Wayne Dasher. We can't wait to share all that with you, but first, some news. The USDA recently took a look at the growth in recent years of crop insurance products designed for specialty crops and organic produced products. USDA Radio's Rod Bain has more.
Not only has production of specialty crops, organic crops, local food, and greenhouse production grown in recent years, as USDA Risk Management Agency Acting Administrator Richard Flournoy points out, so has crop insurance offerings in those areas.
All the growth we've had in those programs over the years, as well as the interest in those programs, and that we have made a lot of changes to organic and specialty crop coverage based on producer feedback.
Additional changes to crop insurance for growers of those specific commodities came about via the 2018 Farm Bill. That was among the highlights of recent RMA reports. Additional findings from the reports include an over $19 billion increase in liabilities for insured specialty crops over a 3-decade period, and an increase in organic crop insurance liabilities from $207 million in 2010 to $1.7 billion with a B dollars 10 years later.
Well, how might milk pricing and milk marketing orders be reformed in lieu of market conditions last year? Rod Bain is back with the details.
In 2020, record negative producer price differentials occurred, which were not just abnormal in magnitude, they were unpredictable and greatly contributed to farm milk price volatility.
One reason for a Senate Agriculture Subcommittee hearing Wednesday on milk pricing and possible areas of improvement and reform, and the participation of Cornell University economic professor Christopher Wolf among the panelists. He says those price differentials were caused by a myriad of factors. So when considering improvements to federal milk marketing orders,
the entire supply chain from farmers to processors must be healthy for a prosperous dairy industry. The current set of markets and institutions that we have has evolved around the existing federal milk marketing order system, and the ripple effects of reform should be carefully considered to balance the interests of all involved parties, including equity as well as economic efficiency.
He believes that changes over time in production and consumption aspects are leading in part to eventual reforms in the federal milk marketing orders. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Also this week, the U.S. is ramping up border security to keep African swine fever out. USDA Radio's Gary Crawford has the details.
Over 50 countries currently have cases of African swine fever. The U.S. so far does not have it.
We want to keep it that way.
Dr. Jack Scher with USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service telling a special webinar this week that the urgency level on this is higher now that it's been detected in this hemisphere in the Dominican Republic. And so the U.S. is putting a so-called protection zone around nearby Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And for people in cargo coming and going from seaports and airports in that region, it means
more compliance checks, more surveillance
being done by U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials looking for things that could carry the virus in or out of that region. John Sagel is with that agency, and he says they've already started
mobilizing more resources down there, send them down to add to the workforce there.
Dr. Jack Scher says this is being done
to protect the interests and livelihood of the U.S. pork industries and its producers,
who would lose billions in lost exports if African swine fever were to be detected here. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And finally this week, in the wake of Hurricane Ida, there's more tropical activity brewing in the Atlantic, and all eyes are currently on Tropical Storm Nicholas. But how does the pace of the named storms this year compare to last year? USDA Radio Stephanie Ho is along with USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey to fill us in.
As tropical activity in the Atlantic goes,
to this point, we have had 14 named systems, so we're a little over halfway through the alphabet, and that is certainly well ahead of the average pace. In a typical year, you would only see about that number of storms in the mid-teens in terms of named tropical cyclones.
That was USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
If you go back to last year, of course, we ended up with 30 named storms, and at this point in the season, we were already up to S in the alphabet. And in fact, we had Hurricane Sally moving ashore in the Gulf Coast region in mid-September last year. So we're considerably behind last year, but well ahead of the average pace.
The latest named storm is Nicholas, while the names Odette and Peter are waiting in the wings next in line.
As expected in the earlier forecast back in May and again in August during the update, we are expecting a well above average hurricane season.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And now, what is your goat saying? That is a pretty sweet shirt you got on there. Did you get that from GoatLifeClothing.com? Very humorous and stylish. No, you cannot eat this shirt. I know it looks tasty. GoatLifeClothing.com.
Well, next up on Inside Farm Life, have you ever seen a plant spontaneously form lesions without any obvious sign of injury? If you have, what you may have witnessed are lesion mimic mutants, and they are yield robbers. So today I wanted to bring in Pioneer Field Agronomist Rex Brandon to help us understand how these mimic mutants show up in your field and how you can deal with them. And Rex, welcome into Inside Farm Life.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. Kind of a mouthful there, but we can talk about it.
Well, Rex, more than 50 of these lesion mimic loci have been found in the corn genome, and research tells us that more than 200 may exist. I guess the first question we need to address is, what are these lesions and why do they form?
Yeah, sure. So let's break that down just a little bit on what that's saying there. So it is a class of mutants that are in the plant species. There's over 50 of these loci that are in the process of the genetic makeup that are already present. So these are already in the plant. It's a hyperactive, hypersensitive response that causes them to show up. So environmental conditions, mutations in the genetic makeup, all these things go into making a lesion that forms inside the plant. So it's breaking down and killing off those cells, kind of a suicidal reaction. And that plant sees it as something that's not normal in there. It shuts down those cells and keeps it from spreading throughout the plant. However, in the genetic makeup, those are already inside all the cells of the whole plant. So it's moving mainly from the leaf tip down to the full leaf and even into the stalk in some cases.
So what happens to a plant when these lesions appear? Because I understand this will halt photosynthesis, which will stop kernel development.
Right. So when you're dealing with light penetration, that fuels these lesions to grow. So they're spreading throughout the plants, they're shutting down, they're killed off. That formation happens just from a genetic mutation, or it could even be an environmental factor such as pollen stain that's falling down on those leaves, and it cuts off those cells. The plant doesn't want it throughout the whole plant, so it dies off. Other factors could be genetic mutations, mutations in genes, interference in genes, defects in downstream genes, or even errors in metabolism. Somewhat rare, but they're all available or all inside the plant already. It can happen in other competitor products. We've seen it in milo, we've seen it in soybeans. They're just labeled a little differently.
And you talked about environmental conditions a moment ago. Where these lesions are showing up, what kind of light and temperature factors and what kind of field conditions seem to promote their expression?
Sure. So anytime we're getting our temperatures below 60 degrees, it kind of creates different kind of stress in the plant. And also we have these huge temperature swings, could have a 100-degree day with cooler nights. So that's not normal type stress for these plants, which brings on these mutations in the genes to happen. Saturated soils could also be a factor if you're getting a lot of rain. As these conditions are present, these conditions just appear more active.
And I think it's worth noting that research has shown that symptoms tend to be observed more frequently in corn following corn and also in irrigated fields.
Right. So first of all, this is not a huge factor in our fields. As our corn's good and we're walking through there, we just come across one of these plants, and I'm talking maybe 1 in 1,000 plants. And it makes you wonder what's going on, especially when if there's something you could do to prevent it, you want to figure out what you need to do. So, of course, you can send these samples off to a lab to get them diagnosed and see if that's exactly what's going on. But altogether, there is huge yield loss on it because it's shutting down the photosynthesis, and the plant's not able to create those kernels like it wants because of the death of the cells in the leaf. The only thing we can do to break the cycle is crop rotation. If we can put a different crop besides corn on corn in between those growing seasons, it'll reduce some of these mutations because some of those soil-borne diseases will be gone.
Well, even though this may be a 1 in 1,000, I think what trips some farmers up is when they're out walking the fields and see this. At first blush, they might think that they're dealing with some sort of a residue-borne foliar disease. And as you mentioned earlier, you often see it start in the lower leaves and work its way up the plant. But this isn't a fungus, and incorrectly treating it as such may wind up costing a farmer time and money and not yielding any results.
Yeah, best thing to do is just get you a whole plant sample and send it off to a diagnostic lab. If it is a fungus, then they'll reply back and you'll know a fungicide would take care of the problem. But most likely when we have a full total plant infestation like this, you're going to find these disease lesion mimic mutants. And best thing for us to control them is a crop rotation.
I don't know, you touched on this just a moment ago, but the research on this is telling us that hybrid genetics can have a large influence on the expression of lesion mimic mutants.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell right now since there's so many of these that are already found in the plant, and whether that plant's expressing it or not, it's just hard to trace back. But some hybrids will kind of show a difference more than others. What's the best answer to that? It's hard to answer that, but key growing conditions will make a huge influence on it also. Less stress, less problems.
And I guess it should be noted that some of these symptoms will begin showing up just a few weeks after emergence, and then a smaller number of these lesions will start showing up around the time of tasseling. So if you saw them begin a few weeks ago, that might be what you have going on there.
That's right. Most of these conditions are going to appear pre-tassel. Right now, if you were examining your corn and it's that black layer, you're most likely going to find a whole early chlorosis type plant that's just died off. And it'll be hard to trace it back to exactly what the factor was because the whole plant kind of had premature death.
Well, Rex, this is all really great information. And if folks want to know more about this topic or about any of the other helpful agronomy information published by Pioneer, where can they go to access that?
Yeah, Pioneer.com has opened up their whole agronomy resources. Anything's available on there for them to look up. Some crop focus articles on all kinds of plant disease and any issues you're finding in the field. Also, a local Pioneer agronomist will be able to help you out, or your local sales professional. All great contacts for more information.
Well, Rex, we thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Inside Farm Life, and we hope you'll come back in the future to share more of these great agronomy tips from Pioneer.
Hey, appreciate it. Thanks. Have a good harvest your way.
Again, we've been speaking with Rex Brandon, a field agronomist with Pioneer. Many companies promise increased yields and a higher return on investment, but again and again, results show that one company stands apart from the rest. Concept Agritech delivers innovative concepts utilizing the latest technologies in agronomy, biology, and chemistry to enhance soil and plant health with seed treatment, planter-applied fertilizers, foliar fertilizers, and full-season soil treatment solutions. To find out how to put Concept Agritech to work for you, visit conceptagritech.com. Concept Agritech. Technology where you need it most. Well, next up on Inside Farm Life, a couple weeks ago when we were at the Farm Progress Show in Decatur, Illinois, we had the chance to catch up with Derek Brosda, who's a contributor to Inside Farm Life and the host of the United We Ag podcast. We chatted about his great podcast and about what he hoped to learn at the Farm Progress Show. Back on Inside Farm Life from Farm Progress 2021 in Decatur, Illinois. And now I am here with Derek Brosda, who's the host of the great United We Ag podcast, covering the world of agriculture, as do we. And Derek, welcome into Inside Farm Life.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Derek's been gracious enough to have me on his show before and feature some of the work that we're doing here, and wanted to be able to return the favor and also talk about some of the projects that he's got coming up. And Derek, you've been on the trail quite a bit here lately. What kind of content have you been bringing in?
It's been Well, the farm show circuit is. My hat's off to you for still being able to make consistent contact week in and week out when you've got so much travel and so many conversations that you're having and so many things, kind of behind the scenes. But one thing that I will say is there's no better place to find out interesting things happening in agriculture than being out here on the front lines, because you're really seeing, this is where the innovation is. It's where the innovation's happening across the entire industry. You're seeing firsthand product demos. You're seeing new technology, new apps, new things that are out there. So that's probably, where I'm headed towards in the next coming months. Is there's a lot of new technology that I want to talk about that I've got people lined up for. This season, we're going to get a lot more international. There's a lot more guests from all over the world joining us to talk about some things, and then some more initiatives around, I would say, the ag industry and as a bigger picture. So, you've got production ag, and then what happens once it leaves the field? What happens when it goes into food production? What happens when it, you got to talk about branding it and putting it on the shelf for people to make a decision whether or not they're going to buy or whether or not they're not going to buy, and what goes into that decision. I've got a really, the one I'm probably most excited for delves into some of the psychology behind that, and without giving you too much, the gal that I spoke with, said when the government mandates that you have to have a label on it, people actually spite by it more.
Yeah.
And if a company self-imposes that they want to have a label on it to say something, let's say GMOs or whatever, then people actually make the conscious effort to buy it less. So if the government tells you you have to label, they're going to buy it just to spite the government. If the company wants to do it, it's just a bizarre concept of human psychology, and I think that's really interesting because that tugs at our pocketbooks in the ag industry and kind of what we are changing our practices to do and kind of to meet the demand that the consumer wants out there. So a lot more downline discussions, a lot more in the food industry, and again, like I said, my most recent one that I had put out was with a gentleman out of Australia, and just ended up talking about bonsai trees for 2.5 hours. I could have cut a lot more of that. We were on the phone for we started it at 11 o'clock p.m. Central Time because it was daytime over in Australia, and it was like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning before we were getting done. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be a rough morning.
Well, and that's one of the things I really like about your show is that, we focus a lot on some of the higher level, policy stuff and education stuff and how that affects the industry. But you really get into the super niche stuff that a lot of folks don't even think about, but is nonetheless important in the whole ag economy.
Well, and part of the reason behind that is it's just, and I say this, I got to be sounding like a broken record here, but the ag industry is so much bigger than even what's shown here at the the Farm Progress Show. There's acres and acres of displays and demonstrations, but the farm industry as a whole encompasses so many different things. And for somebody that's either looking to want to be more self-sustainable on food, or they're wanting to maybe start a little side business doing something, there's a lot of opportunity in agriculture where you can make a pretty good living doing some of that niche stuff. Uh-huh. Whether that's one of the big things now is bees. We're actually, me and my wife are looking into some options on that to maybe, and I'm not saying it's going to be a big revenue, it's more of a passion project, but something to just kind of broaden your horizons. And it seems impossible, but it's not. And finding people that have done it and taking their blueprint and empowering other people that maybe don't have that agricultural background into getting involved in something like that.
Yeah. What else is on the horizon for the coming few months here for the podcast?
I've got a really interesting, basically there's a lot more niche programming. So there's stuff that deals with ag education. How do we educate, how do we entice non-rural kids to get into, ag business, agricultural type degrees. There's stuff on, some specialty crops. Like I said, again, there's a lot more content coming in from overseas. There's some more stuff on the wine industry, which I've had a little bit more experience in here going forward. A lot of, some opportunities. I've got an apple guy coming on to talk about, U.S. apple growers and just kind of the process behind that and how unbelievably huge that industry is. It's the number one fruit in the world pretty much, or at least in the United States, and just the amount of resources and the size of that industry is just huge. And production issues hurt a lot more than they do in say, commercial agriculture. If there's a problem one step down, there's not as much quantity. So how do you protect what we have? And again, like I said, I'm probably most excited for some of the international content and hearing some people from parts of Europe and parts of Asia on how to do some of the ancient techniques that they've been farming with overseas for forever. So.
Which goes against the grain for everything we see here at Farm Progress Show, where everybody's trying to get technology and innovation, the buzzword, and everybody wants to convince you their way is the new, different way, and the way you should be doing it. So
it is, and I think there on the technology side, and this is it stems from a conversation that I. Not so much a conversation, a presentation I heard in Des Moines at Tech Hub Tech Hub Live a couple of weeks ago, and on the technology side, I think particularly in the IoT division, what this guy was preaching. There was a luncheon, and he was one of the the ag precision ag guy of the year, and he just got up and basically said, "Look, like around this show, everybody, you're all looking at each other like you're competition. You're not competition, you're potential partners. And you have to find ways to interface with each other. You have to find ways to work with each other, and nobody has to come in with the arrogance of it's our way or the highway, because farmers are growing increasingly intelligent about the technology that they're using, and they're wanting 1, 2, maybe 3 apps that can control their life. They're not wanting 15 different proprietary applications. They're wanting companies that can work together, companies that can interface with each other. And regardless of color of equipment that you're using, or of irrigation stuff, or whatever the case may be. So it's definitely going to be an exciting couple of years going forward in the ag industry, and I'm excited to talk to some of those technology specialists that are coming up here in the next couple of months.
Well, not only are you a gifted podcaster, but you come by this honestly here because you yourself are a farmer as well.
Yeah, I am farm with Dad. Corn and soybeans mainly. So it's kind of funny, like when I talk to people, and especially in these niche areas, and I'm sitting here spouting, there's more to ag than corn and soybeans and cattle, and that's the world that I grew up in. And so that's part of the fun for me doing this, is I'm learning more every time I sit down with somebody, and as well as I do, when we're about to talk to somebody, there's a fair amount of research that goes into it, and a fair amount of discovery on your own, and then you're able to really delve into a topic, and then have somebody really elaborate that for you.
Right.
And so, but yeah, we, Dad and I, our family, we've got some brothers that are involved as well. We farm in eastern Nebraska, about 30 minutes west of Omaha.
Excellent, man. Well, I tell you what, we are excited to showcase your work here with Inside Farm Life here, and to let the folks meet you and hear all about what you got going on here. And Derek, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Inside Farm Life.
No, thank you so much. I every time we talk, I'm more and more impressed with what you're doing with Inside Farm Life. I see it's got a great future. It's a great source of information, whatever you're looking for. So I'm just grateful to be a part of it, Brent. Thank you.
Again, we've been speaking with Derek Brosda, the host of the United We Ag podcast. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts. Gateway Seed Company was founded in 1997 on a simple principle. It doesn't start with the seed, it starts with the farmer. We pride ourselves in doing all we can to understand our customers' farming operations. We take the time to listen to their concerns, then focus on providing a solution to address their specific needs. Gateway Seed offers seed corn with trait packages from Bayer and soybeans with trait packages from Bayer, Corteva, and BASF. To learn more about how Gateway Seed can boost your yields and increase your return on investment, visit gatewayseed.com. Well, next up on Inside Farm Life, combines have begun to roll in some parts of the country, and early returns are starting to fuel discussions in the corn market. Jesse Allen is at the Big Iron Show in West Fargo, North Dakota this week, and he has more on this week's Market Talk report. Jesse.
Well, thank you very much, Brent, and time now for another Market Talk update here on Inside Farm Life. This week we're talking with Mike Zuzolo of Global Commodity Analytics. We're looking at some of the disappointing early corn harvest results and how that's factoring into our market trade. Mike has some interesting analysis to go over, and we also look at the price of corn and more, and we dive deep into this corn market heading into the back half of September. And we pick up the conversation with Mike from Wednesday's episode of Market Talk, talking about some of those disappointing early yields. Disappointing yields out of that Eastern Corn Belt. We're hearing more late season disease in the Eastern Corn Belt. And, we pull up, I know you have a corn yield map here. We'll pull this up just for our discussion, Mike, on the video. But very interesting. We talked a lot about the Eastern Corn Belt all year long, how this is going to be the garden spot. This is going to make up for the Western Belt. And now we're starting to maybe pull that a little bit into question. What are your thoughts just with what you're hearing about some of those early yields, Mike?
Yeah, excellent points that you bring up. And I'll add to that many producers, and I think we in the trade, thought the early corn would be the best because it would have gotten around and not had to deal with the very hot August and very dry August in some of these key states. The map you're looking at right now is the September corn yield estimates by USDA. And then I highlighted the idea that 5 of these major corn producing states east of the Mississippi River we're all going to have record yields. I don't know a time when I've seen all 5 of these have the exact same situation where they've been able to have record yields posted. And so that got me thinking even before I started hearing about the corn yields in Illinois. I started looking at topsoil, subsoil moisture levels. So what I did on this map was I highlighted those 5 states, and then up in red, I put the yield for each state based upon some of the analysis I did, and noticed that Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio all have moisture level conditions very similar to 2019. And that's the kind of analysis that I really like, Jesse, is when it all comes together and you've got 3 states that are contiguous with one another, all having a similar weather pattern in 2019, all having similar yields, all having similar moisture levels as a result. So it really calls into question, if Illinois is having a tough yield situation now, is Indiana going to have a tough yield situation? And is Ohio going to have a tough yield situation? Because as you say, it's disease, it's anthracnose, it's tar spotting. There are some lighter test weights as well. One client in Central Illinois said he's running 52 to 54 pound test weights. And so this could be also disease related. Even though fungicide was widely used in these areas, it seems to still be an issue of the plant health not being able to stay solid throughout the growing season. So this leads me to the next analysis, and this is where I did look at the topsoil and subsoil levels in these key states, and I threw in Iowa as well, as a result of the fact that Iowa is obviously the key state to be looking at every year. But if you look at Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, and remember that they're similar yield numbers in 2019, this is why I say that, is because topsoil, subsoil moisture levels in all 3 of these states are almost identical. I mean, within 1 or 2 points of where they were back in 2019. And I just was blown away when I ran this. And all these numbers are as of mid-September.
Well, very interesting numbers, Mike. And we'll flip that over and just talk and look at the price. And we think about how these yield estimates and what we get for final yields in is going to affect our markets. And, we look at world corn prices. And this is interesting as well as I look at this chart. And I know you can break it down more for us, but, obviously we've been hovering around that $5 cash price, and we're back up to about $5.40 on the board. We bounced off some lows here, and talk about where world corn prices are at right now in relation to just what we're seeing here in the U.S.
Yeah, this is a chart that is both good and bad. It's good from a standpoint that we are dirt cheap compared to all of our major competitors, or most of our major competitors. It shows very clearly the last week, 2 weeks, what we've had to go through because of the hurricanes, both Ida and Charlie. And the fact that we are now down to prices as low as and recently lower than Argentina. And so we really are competitive. We're only competitive if we can ship it out the door. And I think this goes to the bigger picture in my more short-term outlook, Jesse. I like the fact that the funds have trimmed their longs. I like the fact that we've traded a lot of COVID fears. I like the fact that the Fed fears have also been traded about when they're going to taper through the currency markets. But what I don't like is we're not getting back up and running yet in the Gulf like we need to. And today, for instance, Gulf corn is still only trading at 601 compared to 643 about 2 weeks ago. This goes back to the hurricanes, but we are still not seeing the basis pop. And we're not seeing that basis pop because we're not up and running completely like we need to be. So this, I think, limits us in terms of what the futures market can do between now and the stocks report. So like last week, I think I mentioned I'm looking at a low, probably closer to the stocks report at the end of the month. I still am on target for that.
And again, that's comments with Mike Zuzolo of Global Commodity Analytics from last Wednesday's episode of Market Talk. Find more online, markettalkag.com. This has been the Inside Farm Life Market Talk update for this week. I'm Jesse Allen reporting.
And again, you can find Jesse's daily market updates at markettalkag.com. Again, that's markettalkag.com. And you can find him by searching Market Talk on Facebook. He also appears on the American Ag Network, and you can hear him host Your Ag Today, weekday mornings about 6:50 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Satellite Radio, Rural Radio, Channel 147. Next up on Inside Farm Life, have you ever wished you had an extra set of eyes to help you diagnose problems outside your equipment while you're operating it? On this week's installment of Bushels and Cents, the hot rod farmer Ray Bohacks offers up one possible solution.
Welcome to Bushels and Cents from Farm Machinery Digest Radio, heard exclusively on Sirius XM Channel 147 Rural Radio. I am your host, Ray Bohacks, the hot rod farmer from New Jersey. And never forget, it is not what you make, but what you keep that counts. There are so many inexpensive, small, and easily mounted, high-quality video cameras today that one can be the eyes on machinery in areas that you cannot see. Consider mounting a video camera on your planter on one row unit. This is a great way to discover an error in a setting or movement of parts that is only revealed dynamically. But it does not stop there. Apply the same theory to a hay baler, combine, mower conditioner, and everything else. Remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Agriculture runs on machinery, profits on reliability. Visit farmmachinerydigest.com, where steel and soil meet.
And as always, don't forget, you can check out all of Ray Bohacks' great multimedia content at farmmachinerydigest.com. You can also hear him host Farm Machinery Digest Radio on SiriusXM Satellite Radio, Rural Radio, Channel 147. It airs each Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern and again on Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern, so I hope you'll go and give him a listen. Well, next up on Inside Farm Life, it's time to take things back to the country. And this week, we welcome into the program Daryl Wayne Dasher. It seems like I can't turn anywhere in indie country music circles these days without his name coming up. He has some new music out there that we want to talk about later on in the show. But Daryl, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Inside Farm Life.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Daryl's on the independent Flaming Tortuga Records label, which makes him a label made to a friend of the show, Scott Southworth, who was featured a few weeks ago. And Daryl, the thing I love about your bio when I read it, it labels your genre as not classifiable. And I love that because no one is locking you into a box. It's been described as Americana, country, folk, and Western, and it's all great.
Well, I like that. I've always listened to all kinds of music. My whole life, since before memory, and so even though my voice and my writing style lends itself to kind of a classic country / Western genre, I just don't want to be stuck there, I guess.
So like I like to do with artists, to set the table for listeners who might not be familiar with you, tell us a bit about your raising in Paulding, Ohio, population 3,605, which is about 65 miles southwest of a bar in Toledo across from the depot.
That's right. It sure is. I think I've played that bar a couple times. Paulding, definitely a farm community. It's a small town. I was lucky that there was a field right in my backyard, and it still is. It's still there. That's a rare thing these days. It's far enough from Columbus that it's not going through that, where the city's just eating everything, So, and my sister and her husband still operate a family farm there, about 1,300 acres. And so, it's just a small town.
Who were some of your musical influences growing up?
All of them.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of my time in front of the record player at home, and I was lucky to have eclectic parents. So we had everything from Bob Dylan to Kenny Rogers to Hawaiian music to Dolly Parton, and it was pretty random. But I remember one of my mom's painting buddies, Carol. She had two sons that were just a little older than me, and I would get their hand-me-down records. And I was about 3 or 4 years old when they handed me down their Kiss records.
Oh, yeah.
And so I saw a picture of you somewhere with a Kiss shirt, so I
Right,
thought I'd
right.
mention this. I think that was one of the first times I thought, well, this is my record, so I was heavily influenced by the visual of it and everything. Of course, there wasn't MTV or anything back then, but I just thought it was really exciting that there could be a visual and theatrical element to music as well. And but then after that, it varies. I'm hugely influenced by Waylon Jennings, George Jones. Those are two of the big ones. Vocally, I'm probably more influenced by Katie Lang and the Reclines, like a lot of the Canadian music I really love. And gosh, I'm still listening. I find something new almost every day, so I'm still influenced by whatever moves me, I guess.
Well, you first popped on many people's radar in 2008 as part of the Spirit of the Outlaws movement. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, that was, speaking of Waylon, that was, I was so honored to get to do that. That was one of those, the universe just put me in the right place. I got super lucky. But so Bridget London, a lot of people call her the Highway Woman. She put together this. It was every Thursday, I think, the first Thursday of every month or something, at Douglas Corner here in Nashville. And the reason I wanted to go see it was Waylon's old bandmates were playing, including my favorite all-time drummer, Richie Albright. And I just wanted to go see Richie play live, and so I emailed Bridget and said, "Can I come? What do I do?" And I walked in, and she had this like epiphany or something, and she was like, "I think you're supposed to sing with the guys." And I'm like, my personality, usually I would just crawl into a hole in the corner and say no, that's just kind of how I am. But for whatever reason, I was like, absolutely, let's do this, and like before I knew it, I was up on stage singing with Waylon's band. And we did a Chris Christopherson song called "Loving Her Was Easier," which we then later recorded. But yeah, it was just one of those crazy moments I'll never forget. And it was an honor to be involved.
What does that term outlaw mean to you? Because I know it means something different to just about every musician.
For sure. I think, and I think if you would have asked Waylon or Willie or Cash or any of them, it was just that they were doing their own thing. They weren't really following the mold. And in Nashville, and I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. It works. It's a format that works. It's a formula that works and has worked for many, many years as far as making money and stuff like that. But, Waylon came in and said, no, I want my band and at least my drummer. And if I can't have him, I'll leave. And this is a major record label, like his first big deal. And Chad Adkins is the guy he's telling this to. And so that's kind of where the outlaw thing comes in for me. It had nothing to do with, being arrested or,
right.
That came later for several of the guys. But no, I think it's just blazing your own path, basically.
Well, we talk about Waylon. Through your connections, you also had the opportunity to work with Jerry Jigger Bridges, who worked with Waylon Jennings, among other artists. What was that experience like?
Amazing. Yes, I was so lucky. My first solo record, which is called Long Road Now, was produced by Jigger, and Richie's the drummer on the record. And basically, we were going to do a compilation record for the Spirit of the Outlaws thing. But once several of us got in there and started recording, we were having so much fun. We just kept recording, and so that's how I ended up with my first record. Actually, was just we started off, we were going to do the one song for the compilation record, and I ended up with the whole record out of the deal. The only song on that album I didn't record with them or Jigger was recorded in Sweetwater Sound in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And that was my family backing me up on that song. So super proud of all of it. But yeah, Jigger he's an amazing producer and a great friend. And yeah, it was an honor.
Now, when you say your family backing you up, tell me a bit about your family's musical background.
Yeah, well, that song in particular, it was my Uncle John's bluegrass band, the Bottom of the Barrel Boys, who were from Grover Hill, Ohio. And so they were always a huge influence on me, just, especially my Uncle John, just listening to him singing Froggy Went A-Courtin' and, like, all those tunes. And my dad ended up later in their lifespan, Dad was playing upright bass with them. And so when we went in to do this song, it was called I Saw the Master, which I learned from Uncle John. And so I had the bottom of the barrel boys, including my dad, Uncle John, and my mom came in and sang harmonies on it. And so, yeah, it was a family affair, I guess.
Well, before we go any further, how about we hear one from Daryl Wayne Dasher from the new album, Honky Tonk Ways. This is Beneath the Silver Maple on Inside Farm Life.
Oh, I love the feeling that I get when I leave the interstate and start that journey through them Pennsylvania hills. Bouncing past the farmer's fields, that old small town and curvy mountain road that sometimes gives me chills. Beneath the silver maple, it never gets old. I think of all the music that's been played, with melodies of laughter floating through that kitchen. Memories like these, they never fade. Memories like these never fade. Well, it's good to see so many friends, and it's nice to roll this way again. And I've waited on this day for oh so long. Like the maple seeds that spin so many feelings floating in, and I'm right back where I feel like I belong. Beneath the silver maple, it never gets old. I think of all the music that's been played, melodies of laughter floating through that kitchen. Memories like these, they never fade. Oh no, memories like these never fade. Gates and let the neighbors in, and all our friends will gather under sunny summer skies. And when the night comes to an end, I know I'll see you all again, 'cause under this old tree there's no goodbyes. Beneath the silver maple, it never gets old. I think of all the music that's been kitchen. Memories like these never fade. Memories like these never fade. Oh no, memories like these never fade.
And so our segment is presented by the George Jones, the Castro Pub and Museum and Gift Shop on 2nd Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. And I understand you have a great connection to George Jones.
So I was in a rock band called Mellow Down Easy for a long time, about 12 years or so here in Nashville. And for a good spell, we had a manager friend, and also a guy that would let us rehearse at his house. His name was Pat Boone, but not the Pat Boone. It's another Pat Boone. And Pat was the monitor sound guy for George Jones. And so through Pat, we got to know a lot of the crew and the band members and started kind of hanging out. And some of the band members like Kent Goodson would come and play with us when they were off the road. And through that, I kind of ended up getting a job with the sound company that worked for Jones. And basically, that's how I got to meet him in the long run. And it was at his house in Franklin, Tennessee. And we'd set up the stage and build everything, like the risers and everything, so that when he'd rehearse, it was exactly like it was going to be for his show. And then he'd come out and do the rehearsal, and we'd tear it all back down, put it in the truck, and head back to Nashville. So
that's quite the production.
Cool thing. Huh?
That's quite the production.
It was, yeah. You know, most people in Nashville have that done, you know, at a sound stage here or whatever. But you know, he's George Jones, man.
What years would that have been?
Oh, I'm so bad with years. Gosh, I don't know. Maybe 2006 might have been the first year. All the way through until George passed. I would get to work on and off with them.
Well, that's special. What did you learn from watching him go through his paces?
A lot. And I don't usually like to talk about this, but since we're talking about George and learning from him, as a kid, I chewed, I dipped, and then in college, I didn't want it in my teeth anymore, and I discovered cigarettes, and I started being a smoker. And I think I was 29 at the time when George caught me smoking on the property, and he said, "Son," he said, if I would have quit when I was 29 years old, you imagine what I would sound like right now. And this is at the time when, this is maybe a year after Choices had come out, the Cold Hard Truth album. Yeah. And in my opinion, he was singing better than he ever had, except for he couldn't get his breath. And even right at the end, the only thing keeping George Jones from singing as good as he's ever sang was him not being able to get his breath. And I said, "Yep, you're right." And that year on my birthday at midnight, I quit, and I haven't touched another one since. So that was one really big lesson I got from George Jones.
Man, I mean, that's a heck of a story right there.
Yeah. I don't like to talk about it because it's embarrassing that I was even a smoker, but I was, and luckily I'm not now.
So you definitely have some great memories of the possum.
I do, mostly as a fan. But yeah, I getting to work, for him, even at that small capacity was fantastic. And he and Nancy are both wonderful people. And I always thought, like they would never remember me from time to time with all the bajillions of people that they've met over the years. And I remember one time we were in a Cracker Barrel in Franklin, Tennessee, my dad and we were about to leave, and I didn't want to bug him, so I just kind of, we kind of made it out the door, and then Dad overheard Nancy saying, "Was that Dash?" And I was like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me!" But yeah, and then later over the years, I would get to go to shows and stand backstage. I got to see him go through the transformation of not playing guitar on stage anymore, and then the transformation of losing the monitors and going into the in-ear monitors, and to see somebody of his caliber go through that, it was something else. I mean, but yeah, over the years, I was so lucky to get to know him and Nancy, and yeah.
So many different genres touch your career here, and you were talking about Kiss earlier, but for fans of rock music, one of your former bandmates over the years and writing collaborators is Jeff Keith, who was in the band Tesla. Tell us about that partnership.
Yeah, that came through George Jones, man. Jeff is a huge George Jones fan. And so at the time that this all went down, I was working for George on it like a temporary basis for the sound company. And whenever he would have a rehearsal, instead of going to sound check here in Nashville or whatever, they would just bring everything to his house in one of his garages, and we'd set it up, and he'd just walk out when he's ready, and we'd rehearse and tear it all back down, put it in the truck, and get it ready to go. Well, the crew, they were on a Canadian tour or something. I can't remember where they were, but the crew was at like a Mall of America or something, I think, and like one of those places that have the big roller coasters in it. And they had their George Jones jackets on. And some of the Tesla crew saw the George Jones jackets and said, "Oh, you got to meet our friend Jeff." And then so Jeff met them and then flew to Nashville to kind of hang out. And we decided to start writing music. Like, I just happened to be one of the guys that was there. I was just, again, super lucky in that situation. And I was a Tesla fan, huge fan of Jeff's voice in particular. I had no idea he was a country music fan. And so we ended up writing some songs and recording a little record under Jeff Keith and his Country Music Friends, or CMF. And we did a couple shows, and then Tesla has blown up since then again. So they're working really hard and back on the road and putting out some great records. So it's one of those things. I still talk to Jeff at least once every other month or so, and whenever it works out, I'm hoping we get to write again and do some more.
So tell me about your path from Paulding, Ohio to Nashville, Tennessee, and what that looked like.
Yeah, well, I kind of knew early early high school, I kind of knew I was thinking about moving to Nashville, and we came down a few times. My Uncle John and Dad and I, and then Dad took me one other time just to kind of get a feel for the area and go to some meetings. I went to a BMI roundtable, which is one of these, BMI is, well, you're probably familiar with them, but they're supposed to help us as far as get our royalty money for radio plays and stuff like that. But they had these open meetings called roundtables where they would just kind of sit and talk to you, and then also kind of really into being on their roster, and so and I just walked door to door and kind of said, "What do you guys do here?" And I was a lot more brave in high school than I am now for some reason, but so I kind of knew I was coming this way. And then in college, though, I went to college at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, and I had switched majors from music into environmental policy. I was a Boy Scout, and I've always been an outdoorsman. And I wasn't really feeling the purpose of having a music degree, and it just wasn't settling with me, I guess. So I went into environmental policy and education. I ended up moving to Yellowstone National Park when I graduated. But in the summers, I was living in Nashville and working for the security for Grand Ole Opry, and also working at a boot store in Goodlettsville. And so I was getting my feet, in the door. And and then a couple of years after I moved to Yellowstone, I realized how important it was to me to be playing music, and that I couldn't really do it from the remote, Wyoming and Montana are pretty remote. And so I ended up coming back to play on a record. One of my buddies was doing a rock record, and then I just stayed, and here I am.
Well, to switch gears here, you were instrumental in helping launch the National Roots music movement, the last Honky Tonk music series, which honored the late singer-songwriter Wayne Mills. Tell us about that and about what Wayne meant to you.
Yeah, well, I met Wayne right at the end. In fact, I have a flyer that we were supposed to play on a show together right after he passed, but I met him maybe just a few months before he passed. And he was one of those guys that, everyone knew about him, and you always heard that, he would try to help anybody he could. And he didn't even know I was a singer or a songwriter or whatever. I was just sitting in the front row at one of his shows here in Nashville, and he came off the stage, and I don't know if he just realized I was by myself and he didn't know who I was or whatever, but he just came and sat down at my table and started talking to me, and, talking about the business and how to keep your head, out of, you get kind of frustrated in this business a lot as an independent artist. And it was cool to hear him talk about, just to not let any of that get to you, not even worry about, am I enjoying playing music? Yes. Are people enjoying my music? I hope so. That's all that really matters. And you just keep going as long as those two elements are there. And and then he got shot and killed here in Nashville. It just a stupid situation. And so shortly after, Bridget London, who did the Spirit of the Outlaws, started putting together this the last Honky Tonk music series, and we named it that because it was Wayne's last album was called The Last Honky Tonk, which was a song written actually by one of my friends, Roger Allen Wade. And so we just wanted to carry on in his idea of just helping each other, and instead of competing against each other, competing with each other, and forming that kind of bond that helps lift everyone up around you, and that's what we did. We did it for a long time.
One of the things I love about you, because it aligns so well with what we do here, is a support of veterans and veterans causes. Tell us about that.
Yes, sir. That's a huge deal for a lot of us, but in my opinion, I kind of have some guilt, for not serving my country. I was an Eagle Scout. I always thought, I could have went into the military a little bit of a higher grade because of that even. But I wanted to do my music, and that's the route I took. And so I feel like it's sort of like my way of serving is to help support our military, and to raise awareness for the situations that they're in constantly. And so, and then ironically, that was sort of one of the main focal points of the last Honky Tonk. For whatever reason, we just instantly all gravitated to military causes. and we got in with some great people. My friend Don Batipel, for one, who did the first concert of light that we held for veterans in Hopewell, Virginia. And basically, we would just hold these concerts with as many people as we can get on the bill, and it would be free to veterans. And they just basically have a night of lifting them up in spirit, and just letting them know that we care about them. And I'm still doing those. We just did one in Washington State this year. Actually, we've been trying to get it together for a couple years, but the Captain Joseph House Foundation, which is in Port Angeles, Washington, is a bed and breakfast that's free to any Gold Star family. So if you've lost a member of your family directly because of war, or even indirectly, like by suicide after, you can actually go to this respite house and just relax and be around good people, And so we've been wanting to do something for them. And last year, of course, we couldn't do anything other than online. And it was okay, but online is not the same as being there.
Right.
So this year we finally got to do it in person in Washington State, and and so that was fantastic, and we're proud to do it.
Well, I think that's excellent, man. And I know life on the road is an adventure, and in true outlaw fashion, you toured the country in a hand-me-down 1992 Buick. What was that experience like?
Fantastic, man. You did more research than a lot of people. I appreciate that. The Buick was actually really important to me. I've got the keys hanging right beside me right here while we're talking. And the reason was my grandmother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia. And at the time, I was the only grandkid that didn't have a car. And so at a show in the tip jar, my grandma left the keys to her 92 Buick, and it was not something you expect, but it was definitely emotional. And she had left one of my grandfather's pencils from his old plumbing company in there, and a couple other things that I still have with me today. And her nickname was Blondie, so I named the car Blondie.
Nice.
And so I went everywhere, man, upstate New York to Southern California.
Do you still have it?
Nope. The car finally gave up on me a couple years ago, and so now it's a Pacifica van, but I still have like a lot of the trinkets that she left me in the car. I've moved into the van, I still feel like I'm riding in Blondie, But on the last tour, I actually found this app where you could take pictures, and they would send a postcard with the picture, and so I took pictures of it, like me driving through the redwood, the hole in the redwood, or like in Joshua Tree, California, or wherever I was, and I would send it to Grandma, and so she could see her car was still out rocking.
So it's an exciting week for you here on the heels of the success of your last album, 2019's Reincarnation. You released your latest project, aptly named Honky Tonk Ways. What inspired this project?
Oh man, the pandemic helped a lot actually in this situation. I was supposed to be on the road pretty heavy at that point, supporting the Reincarnation record, and I instantly, all of a sudden everything was gone. There was no dates. There were no, I didn't have anything on my calendar for the first time in a long time. And luckily, the last Honky Tonk music series started doing they started doing the live stream thing, which started me doing a weekly live stream, which kind of kept me in my chops, I guess, But so everybody started doing the Zoom meetings and the FaceTime stuff, And so a good friend of mine, Linda McCrae, who's a Canadian folk artist, a Juno Award-winning, she's amazing. I'm a huge fan, but luckily enough, I'm also a friend. And we decided to set up a weekly Zoom meeting and start just trying to write via Zoom. And it worked out really well right away. And before we knew it, we had a bunch of songs. And she's going to be doing an album that has her versions of some of these and also some of the other ones that I didn't do. And so all of a sudden we had those songs. I had the Honky Tonk Ways songs I'd written with Bridget London already. I knew I wanted to cover another Marty Robbins song. And once I started working on the record, I got in contact with a fantastic trumpet player from the Mavericks, actually, but Lorenzo Molina Ruiz. He's from Cuba, and he was like in a music conservatory when he was like 10 years old. And he's amazing. And because everyone was off the road because of COVID, I was able to work with him and with some other musicians I probably wouldn't have had the chance to work with if it hadn't been the situation. So I took advantage of it. I got in the studio in Hendersonville, and we just started hammering this out. And luckily we finished it.
Well, I want to play another cut from the new album. This is the title track, Honky Tonk Ways. What can you tell us about this one?
Yeah, I wrote that one night over a bottle of wine and with my friend Bridget London. And we had just both come off a really long run on the road separately and together through the series, the last Honky Tonk music series. And so we were both in that like sort of exhausted phase where we were like, we can't accomplish anything tonight, but the guitars happened to be sitting there. And then all of a sudden we had a little conversation about something about, the honky tonk lifestyle or whatever. And before we knew it, both of us had our guitars in our hands. And about 10 minutes later, we had the song. So I feel like it's a little bit more autobiographical for her. And so I kept it as we're singing about a female. And the music business has always been a lot harder on female artists than it has been on male artists. And I don't know why that is or what causes that situation. So I wanted to maintain it being about a female honky tonk singer. And that's just what it ended up being.
I can tell what you're thinking. You can't take your eyes off that girl in the band. But I think you should know how hard loving her could be on a man. 'Cause she's not like any other lover you have known. She might just love you and leave you alone. 'Cause there's no man nowhere that knows how to change her hard living and hard loving honky tonk ways. So now you're thinking that you're strong and willing to travel down any road she goes. Well, I knew a man just like you, and it wore down his soul. 'Cause she is not like any other lover you have known. And she might be better off just staying alone. 'Cause there's no nowhere that knows how to change her hard living and hard loving honky tonkin' ways. She might just love you with all that she can. It'll never be enough, and soon you'll understand. No man nowhere knows how to change her hard living
how's this project different from the last album?
Definitely it's a little bit more homegrown in that I was producing too. I was co-producing with Zach Kosick, my engineer. I had just gotten done producing an album with him on a female artist, Jill Kinsey, and the album was called Blue Light. And we had such a good working relationship that we just kind of kept going when I started to do this record. But we had extra time. Like the Reincarnation record, I was working with Tom Utes, who's a renowned producer and artist himself. And so the time was very limited. I think we did most of it in 2 days. And which is great when you're working with people like that, you can do that, you know, but with this one, we had more time and I was able to be a little bit more experimental, and I was able to pull more people in that I wanted to work with. And it turned out to be, even though we were all in separate rooms, a lot of times it turned out to be a really cohesive and almost live sounding record. And that's what I wanted. So.
Well, you brought up your Facebook live stream, Friday Night Quarantunes that you did through the quarantine. How did that help you build a fan base?
I was really surprised by that. I don't have that many people on my Facebook. I've never been real good at pushing, the social media stuff, but we just started doing it every week and people were sharing it. I suppose that's how it goes. And all of a sudden I had new fans from all over Colorado, California, and I got to meet a bunch of them since, now that I've started slowly getting back out on the road. And it's really something else. And there were two young girls at the last show I did in Ohio that had T-shirts made up with like their favorites of my songs on them. And I didn't know them. I'd never met them before, but they watched Friday Night Quarantunes and they had become, fans through that. And that's when it really hit me, that, wow, that really was a lot more beneficial to me than I thought. I enjoyed doing it and I kind of miss it now, and I'm probably going to continue doing those. But yeah, it was something else. I did not expect that to happen.
Well, before we get out of here, I want to roll one more from you here. Tell us about the inspiration behind the new single Revolver in the Field.
Yeah. So Revolver in the Field is one of the only ones I didn't write on the new record, but it was written by my best friend growing up and musical partner and ex-bandmate, Andrew Adkins. And I'm a huge fan of Andrew's music. He's got a really eclectic style as well. And he had recorded this song and was going to put it out about 1.5 years ago on a record that he just ended up shelving. But I was attached to this song immediately. And I kind of joked with him right away, like I might steal that song, And then when we started recording the record, I called him. I was like, would you mind if I just gave it a shot? And he's like, no, just, let me release it first. But yeah, go ahead and record it. And then we got Lorenzo in on it, playing the horn parts and everything. And then it just became this big theatrical production. And it was so fun. And I was so in love with the song. And at that point, Andy's like, yeah, I'm not going to release it. You go ahead and have it. So I did end up stealing that song from my best friend. But yeah, Revolver in the Field.
After dark, the wolves arrive at my door, and I can hear them howl and moan. Maybe best that I lay low for a while. I wouldn't want to fall prey to their game. I'd turn around fast and run away, and then never come back round here again. No way. I don't need redemption for the things I've done, but I'm tired of running. It's been a great run, but it's over and done, and I'm so uninspired. I always fear when I make a bad mistake. The remorse, it's unfortunate, but regret still lingers around and haunts me. I'm afraid, so afraid. I don't need redemption for the things I've done, but I'm tired of running. It's been a great run, but it's over and done, and I'm so uninspired. Just wanna find a place to lay my head, put my worried conscience away, and just pay for all the trouble I have made. I'd pay. I don't need redemption for the things I've done, but I'm tired. It's been a great run home, and it's over and done, and I'm so uninspired.
So what's on the horizon for Daryl Wayne Dasher?
Well, I'm hoping to get back on the road. It's going to be a slow process. We did do a full month run out west. Started in Southern California at Pioneer Town in Joshua Tree National Park area, and went all the way up to Washington State and all the way to the top there at Port Angeles, and came back. And on the way back through, I got to meet a new sponsor. I've got a new sponsor called Hubert Shoe Grease Company. They've been around about 100 years, and now they're located in Colorado. And how we met up is quite an interesting story. But anyway, I got to stop by in Colorado and see them. And so we're kind of starting a new partnership, and they're going to kind of help out when they can, and I'll help them out when I can. That's the good thing about being independent. You meet people, and you do the best you can with what you got.
Right.
And so, yeah, they're going to be helping me out a lot with the tour as it comes together. Unfortunately, I'm starting to get cancellations and postponements already for this next wave of COVID. And so we're just going to roll with it as it comes. You got to be safe, safety first. And I would hate to be responsible for having anybody get sick for being at a show, so yeah. So I guess first things first, the album comes out this week on Friday, and then Saturday I get to play the Bluebird Cafe for the first time in my life. And I guess right now that's as far as I can focus.
Well, if folks want to know more about your music and follow those tour dates and download and everything else, where can they go to do that?
dwdasher.com.
All right, so make sure you go follow him. And Daryl, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Inside Farm Life, and we'd love to have you come back here again and share more of these stories and more of this great music with us.
I'd love to, Brent. I really appreciate what you guys do. I love the show. I've listened to several episodes now, so
thank you.
Keep it up.
We'll just keep beating that drum here for traditional music and the music that you can't put into a box.
Heck yeah.
And we want to thank you so much for joining us this week and invite you to come back again next week as we take the show on the road to the Farm Science Review in London, Ohio, put on by The Ohio State University. In the meantime, we invite you to subscribe to the Inside Farm Life podcast, where each week we bring you agriculture industry newsmakers, hot-button industry issues, educational features, and the best in true country music. The Inside Farm Life podcast can be found at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Deezer, Audible, Odyssey, and YouTube. We want to say a special thank you to our newest sponsor, the George Jones, 128 2nd Avenue North in downtown Nashville, Tennessee. As I mentioned earlier, it's a great gastropub, museum, and gift shop, and we hope you'll pay them a visit when you're there in the Nashville area and tell them you heard it right here on Inside Farm Life. You can learn more about the George Jones at georgejones.com. We also want to say a special thank you to our additional sponsors, GoatLifeClothing.com, Concept Agritech, and Gateway Seed. Well, friends and neighbors, the clock on the wall tells us it's time to get on out of here. So for now, it's Brent Adams. Let's meet up here again next week, shall we? And hey, bring along a friend.
You've been listening to Inside Farm Life, a production of Farm Life Media. If you have topic suggestions for future episodes, drop us a line at brent@farmlifemedia.com. And be sure to check out our website, farmlifemedia.com.